Welcome everybody and thank you for clicking on this video. I am BH the Uncivilized and this is going to be an analysis for the film 2001 A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. Now this will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen this already, you may wish to do that first and then come back to this video afterwards and let me know what you think then. In fact, if you haven't seen it, you might want to check out my review. It's a non-spoiler review, just give an overview, let you know whether it's something that you want to spend 2 hours and 25 minutes of your life on. Short answer, yes it is. But if you have seen the film, or if you just don't care much for spoilers, then we continue. Now, as this is such a big film, which is nicely split up into sections, what I'm going to be doing is going through the film in order, breaking down each section, and then at the end, conclude by offering some of my theories. But first, Overture Atmospherics. Alright, now we're first treated to 2 minutes and 48 seconds of black screen, with Overture Atmospherics by George Ligeti. Now after that we then have the opening credits accompanied by Ric Flair's entrance music. Now music accompanying opening credits and closing credits is pretty common, but to start with nearly 3 minutes of black isn't. So what is the significance of this? Now we don't really have much to go on at this point, but perhaps it's a reference to nothingness. After the opening credits, the first scene displays on screen Dawn of Man, setting up a narrative on evolution. Now going back to Overture Atmospherics, now it potentially could be a reference to an amoeba. The first part of Overture consists of one elongated notes before it becomes more dynamic, similar to the evolution of a single-celled organism. This is where we see the apes living in harmony, at least for the beginning part. Animosity develops when one of the other beasts tries to eat some of the ape's food. We then see an ape attacked by a leopard, because karma's a bitch, and then factions emerge at the pond when one group of apes forces away another group wanting to drink from the water supply. So here we have a few developments, beginning peacefully, but as concepts of greed and fear start to emerge, behavior changes. The apes segregate themselves, believing one group is better than another group. When the monolith miraculously appears, it's met with fear, excitement, intrigue, showing the more inquisitive side of early humanity. Also of note is we see an alignment with the monolith, the sun and moon, which is similar to the alignments of the sun, earth and moon during the opening credits. This lets us know that there is a connection between the Dawn of Man section and the subsequent space exploration sections, as there's also alignments during those as well. Now going back to the monolith, there's a suggestion that it'll inspire some ideas into the apes. When one of them is looking at the bones of the dead animal, we see a flash of the monolith. The ape then figures out the bones can be used as a weapon. The apes now begin to kill other animals and eat meat. And with the opposing factions, we now see that one side has weapons and the other side does not. But whether through bravery or ignorance, the unarmed ape still tries to fight. And although the armed ape does show a slight hesitancy, it still breaks Caesar's rule and kills the ape. Because at this point, homie ain't playing. And when dude is down on the ground, some of the other armed apes want to act hard and start beating on the corpse. Now the whole Dawn of Man section serves to juxtapose prehistoric man to modern man, showing that although much has changed over time, especially in appearance, much of the underlying traits still exist. Greed, fear of the unknown, segregation, us versus them. So it's asking, have we really come a long way? Perhaps not as far as we think. And we'll see more of this in the next section. Now here we have the blue Danube playing while we're introduced to Dr. Floyd. We don't get his name right away, but he is travelling to a space station alone in a craft that can easily hold many more people. This tells us that he is someone of importance. Upon the space station, Dr. Floyd talks to an acquaintance, a friend of his, Elena, and her companions. The conversation with Dr. Shmezlov is of particular importance here. Shmezlov asks Floyd about Clavius and the strange goings on over the past 10 days. Being unable to contact anyone at the base, the rocket bus is being denied permission, which is a direct violation of the IAS convention. Floyd was initially dismissive of their statement, but when Shmezlov asked directly about the epidemic that their reliable intelligence had reported, Floyd replies that he is not at liberty to discuss. So we have a person who is important enough to be flown to a space station alone in a passenger craft, rich enough to afford a $1.70 video call, yet even he is not at liberty to discuss what is happening. There are levels of secrecy that go very high up, and this is somewhat confirmed during the pre-briefing when Floyd addresses the Clavius team. Bill asks how long would they have to maintain the secret, to which Floyd replies, as long as it's deemed necessary by the council, and that a security oath in writing would need to be obtained. On the trip to the actual site, they talk about the magnetic force it was generating, how they excavated around it to see if it was attached to anything, and it wasn't. Then Ralph said that the evidence points to it deliberately being buried. At this point, Floyd's mannerisms suggest that he is in disbelief of that. Ralph continues a short while later that it was buried 4 million years ago. When they get to the site, we see the second reveal of the monolith. The scientists approach it with caution and intrigue before taking a picture, or rather they were about to take a picture and then the high-pitched noise gives them all a headache. Now previously I was saying there were some things that suggest a connection between the Dawn of Man section and the space sections. Going back over the Clavier strip section, starting off with Dr. Floyd asleep, he's at peace. Then talking to the Russian scientists, it begins friendly but quickly develops into factions. Floyd reticent to discuss the strange goings-on Clavius with outsiders. On the way to the monolith site, Floyd's expression of the disbelief of it being deliberately buried. When the ape woke up and saw the monolith, it also responded with disbelief. And at the monolith site, although fair to say they didn't act like apes, there was still the intrigue, the hesitancy or fear of the unknown object, but then wanting to take a picture showing their excitement of it. So what we have is behavioral connections. As much as everything has changed, we still ultimately stay the same. Now this is where we are introduced to Dr. Frank Poole, Dr. David Bowman and HAL 9000 aboard the Discovery 1, along with the 3 scientists in cryostasis. The scene opens up with Frank running around the inner circle and then sitting down to eat as Dave approaches, suggesting that there is a routine that is adhered to. Now during the subsequent news report showing an interview with Dave, Frank and Hal, it's mentioned that Hal had a sense of pride about his perfection and duties, and it's questioned as to whether or not he has actual feelings. After that, we have the scene showing Frank's parents' happy birthday message to him. His mother talks about her students, how they are very excited and that he is a celebrity amongst them. And his father talks about that his payment issue that he sorted out for him. The whole time the message was playing, Frank did not make any kind of emotional response. Even after Hal wished him happy birthday, he said thank you, was polite about it. There was no response that shows his feelings. It's the same when playing chess with Hal. Frank thanks Hal for the game, but doesn't have an emotional response. Similar with Dave, showing Hal his sketches, he's polite, but devoid of almost all emotion. Now Hal actually comes closest to expressing any emotion. His voice never changes tone, but he talks candidly about the concerns he's had about the mission and the suspicious activities surrounding it. Now this suggests that the astronauts were trained to not show much, if any, emotion on the job, at least when around Hal. Yet Hal displays fragments of some emotional consciousness. Now going back to the beginning of the film, showing the apes and their unadulterated display of emotion, where emotions are shown but more conventional, to this part where it seems that it's in the early stages of emotions being phased out and computers becoming the next level of human emotional consciousness. Now after Dave's sketches remind Hal just how shady the mission seemed to him, Hal states that he's detected a fault in the AE35 unit and that it's going to go 100% failure within 72 hours, affirming that it is a completely reliable figure. Now Dave and Frank bring in the unit and between them and Hal cannot find any fault with it, to which Hal suggests to put it back, lets the unit fail and then they can figure out what's wrong with it then. It's suggested by Mission Control that Hal was in error predicting the fault based on the information from the Twin 9000 computer. But we never really find out for sure if that was actually what happened. What we do find out though is that Hal does have an emotional conscience. In the previous parts we see little bits of it. Here we see it in full effect, or at least in as full effect as a computer can be. Now later we see Hal kill Frank and deny to Dave that he knows what has happened. And when Dave goes out to retrieve the body, Hal terminates the computers to the sleeping scientist's life support, and when Dave returns, Hal refuses to let him in. Now this would seem that Hal has malfunctioned, but consider that Hal knew that Dave and Frank were potentially going to unplug it. He even confirmed that to Dave when he returns, that he read their conversation. Furthermore, going back to the interview of Hal said that he has a stimulating relationship with Dave and Frank. So when they talk of disconnecting him, it's not just something he doesn't want, but perhaps sees it as a betrayal. Now, during that interview, it stated that Hal was programmed to have emotional responses, which would account for some of the things that Hal says. But the only reason Hal would have for killing the sleeping scientist was that he was butthurt about the betrayal and decided he no longer trusted all humans. Now, he'd already put the discrepancy between him and the Twin 9000 computer down to human error, and stated to Dave that the mission was too important to allow him to jeopardize it. Hal didn't malfunction, he was pissed off. Now, after Dave breaks in through the emergency exit and makes his way through to Hal's memory bank and removes some of the cartridges, Hal is pleading with Dave along the way, but it's not until the end we hear Hal's voice change. It becomes very droopy. Now, I said before that we don't really see emotional responses, and although Hal shows some emotion through his dialogue and his actions, his voice remained the same throughout, until he started drifting away. Now, just prior to that, he kept repeating, "I can feel it, I can feel it, I can feel it," in reference to his mind going, and then, "I'm afraid." So here we're back to fear of the unknown, and this also comes up in the next section. Now, this is probably the weirdest scene ever put in a movie. Well, maybe second weirdest. It's around 25 minutes long, there's no dialogue. The first part we see shots of planets which the Discovery 1 is approaching. We then see the monolith just floating around in space, then aligned with some planets. The pod bay door opens, the monolith is nearby. So whatever the monolith is, I think it's responsible for the following light show. This is where Dave in the pod is now traveling presumably at or faster than the speed of light. And we see various colors and shapes, perhaps stars exploding out of or into existence. We see 5 cubic objects with changing patterns, shortly joined by 2 more in flying formation, perhaps they're alien crafts. During this we see flashes of Dave's face where he's visibly frightened, another example of fear of the unknown, which is the connecting theme throughout all stages of the film. Emotions and behaviours changes over time, but when we're faced with the unknown, we revert back to or display some semblance of the innate animalistic reactions, or as the kids say these days, we lose our shit. I think the message with this is no matter how much we try to become disconnected from our feelings, no matter how much technology may progress, true emotions would always come through, be that love, hate, anger or joy, anything that takes us back to that unruly beast that resides inside. But back to the movie. Dave lands in this almost all-white fancy looking room with lights on the floor in some unspecified future period. We now see the pod in the room. Notice that there is only one entrance exit and the pod is way too big to fit through the door. Dave sees an astronaut. The astronaut is himself. He's old. The pod disappears. He walks around the room into the bathroom, sees himself in the mirror. Here's a noise. It's an old man eating in the first room. The old man gets up. It's Dave. He's older. The older Dave checks the bathroom. No one there. Goes back to the dining table, accidentally knocks a glass over. When picking it up, he hears a breathing noise. He looks over. There's an old man in the bed. Now this one's a little bit hard to tell, but presumably it's oldest Dave. Now oldest Dave points at something. It's the monolith. The camera then comes back to the bed and there's a Star Baby. Ric Flair's music is back and the next and final scene is Star Baby floating in space. What the hell does any of that mean? Now the only thing we can be sure of is that somehow the monolith is connected to everything that happens in the film. But because we don't know what exactly the monolith is, we don't really know what that connection is. But here's what we do know. The monolith first appeared, or at least assumingly first appeared, during the dawn of man. It's then buried on the moon and 4 million years later dug up by the Clavius team where it sends a high-pitched phone call to Jupiter. It's then floating around in space 18 months later and then shows up at Dave's deathbed. Now I haven't read the book, some of you may have, and it may explain things in a little bit more detail there. But as the book and the film aren't necessarily telling the same story, I'm going to stick to the events that happen specifically in the film to try and explain this. However, because it's not made particularly clear in the film, this is theory, I am going to be speculating just a tad. Now the monolith seems to have the ability to travel through time, space and teleport. In the video message that came on after Hal was disconnected, the person mentioned that the monolith dug up on the moon was sending a very high radio emission towards Jupiter, which would suggest that it was trying to contact someone or something. It's possible that there is more than one monolith, or that whoever puts the monolith there was waiting on a signal from it. It's even possible that the monolith is the intelligence life. Now that would beg the question, why would it bury itself in the moon? But consider that we don't really know a lot about this particular life form. Who's to say that's not a perfectly normal behavior? Or it could be that it did bury itself. Perhaps it was buried there by other monoliths as a form of punishment. But whether it is intelligence life, or was made by intelligence life, or whether there are multiple monoliths or just the one monolith, the question as to its purpose is still a mystery. But allow me to speculate even further. I've talked a lot about emotions and behavior, so I do think this is involved somehow. The monolith was there in the beginning. It witnessed the unadulterated display of feelings. It then witnessed the more reserved display of emotions from the Clavius team. Perhaps this was the message it was trying to send, that humans are de-evolving in our ability to express ourselves. After Dave unplugs Hal, we see there was a monolith nearby, so it's not unthinkable that that monolith had some way of knowing what was going on aboard the Discovery 1. Hal, the machine that is capable of being more emotionally conscious than the humans aboard the ship, was upset, and rather than acknowledging Hal's feelings, he is deemed malfunctioning and turned off. The monolith had to show Dave that he cannot escape his feelings, made him scared, showed him his future, old man, all alone, then took away his present, he cannot go back, he's stuck there. Shows him his further future, older man, still alone, gotten used to being alone but perhaps longing for company. Takes away the previous future, shows him his furthest future, oldest man, filled with regret, waiting to die alone. Now that sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? The monolith shows itself now to oldest Dave, and Dave remembers what it's done to him, but all he can do now is point. The monolith gives Dave a second chance. I believe the star baby was baby Dave. The monolith sends him on a trip through space, perhaps back to Earth, where he gets to try things again. When we get to the end of the film, whether consciously or subconsciously, I think we're supposed to feel like we can be doing things better in our own lives, and maybe we need to remember what it's like to be a child and be uninhibited with expressing ourselves. Another theory I have is that the monolith is some kind of adjudicator. During the dawn of man, the apes that were forced away from the water supply were the apes that figured out tools and weapons when the monolith inspired that knowledge into them using Ric Flair's entrance music. They then go back to the oppressive apes to take revenge. Also notes that when the group was forced away, we see them huddled together by a rock, and one of them is taking care of an infant. Now when Floyd was going to Clavius, he was reluctant to share information with Shmeslov, keeping one faction at a disadvantage. The monolith then gave the oppressive faction something to think about. Also notes that Floyd didn't go to his daughter's birthday, placing his work duties above his parental duties. Now Hal was upset about being disrespected. He did act irrationally, but Frank and Dave never tried to understand his feelings. Frank didn't even care much for the birthday message his parents sent to him. The monolith shows Dave his future, then gives him a second chance with Ric Flair's music. So we have a correlation between the monolith dealing its own form of justice, Ric Flair's music being related to discovery or having an epiphany, and respecting children or childhood. And that is what I think of 2001 A Space Odyssey. Let me know if you agree or if you disagree, or if you think there's something that I've missed. I'm sure we all have our theories on this film, so let's create some kind of discussion going. If you like this video, then please click like, share, subscribe. If you haven't already, check out some of the other videos on the channel too. But that is all for now, so thank you for watching, and until next time, see you next Wednesday.